Hello, thanks for listening to the Finance Leadership Podcast, the latest update and news about the Finance Leadership Programme. It's produced by AICPA at CIMA, together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. As usual, you're listening to myself, Kevin Gormley, and today we're joined by John Bennett from Kaplan to talk about the upcoming operational case study exam. So probably really relevant for those students who have booked their exam for the first week in May and are anticipating the exam coming up. So we're just going to talk through a number of subjects relating to the exam to try and give you the best possible opportunity. So John, thanks for joining the podcast. If you could maybe start with just telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do and your role at Kaplan, please.
Good afternoon, Kevin. Yeah, I've been involved in the accountancy training game a long time. I won't tell you exactly how long, but I will tell you that John Major was still Prime Minister when I started.
That's a long time, John.
Yes, it's a shame the cameras aren't on. You can see like great hair. But yeah, so I've been doing it for a long time, and I think hopefully that's given me a bit of an insight into how to achieve professional qualifications. And I've been involved in all sorts, really, and the Kaplan now, my role is, I'm still a tutor, but I'm involved in tutor training. I also write exams myself for some of the professional bodies.
So, as I said at the start, we're here to talk about the upcoming operational case study exam in particular, because obviously it's a couple of weeks away. What we're trying to do is get the key pieces of information, the techniques, and some hints and tips what they should focus on in the remaining 2 weeks, because obviously you're not going to learn everything in 2 weeks. But is there anything in particular regarding the current OCS? What's it about, for example? What's the case itself?
I mean, we've seen some really interesting ones over the years, and CIMA have come up with this great one about a company that makes saddles. So it's quite an old-fashioned kind of business. It's owner managed. It's run by a bloke called John Kanann. And they've been making saddles for nigh on a century now. And in some ways, the business is very sort of stuck in its ways. It's quite old-fashioned. It's still using a lot of manual processes. So it's people that make the saddles. There's not a huge amount of automation kicking around. It takes 27 hours worth of labour time to actually get a saddle made from start to finish. They're a business-to-business organisation. They don't sell saddles direct to the general public. They go via retailers. They've got a little bit of an export market, so that could be one of the ways in which one of the variants goes. Their information systems are shocking. They barely exist. Everything's done manually. They do standard cost cards, but they only really update them once a year, and I think as a result of that, we can expect to see some pretty hefty variances. It's a business which is kind of going nowhere, but there's maybe a sort of a ray of light on the horizon, because Freya, who is John's daughter, is a very keen show jumper and has a few ideas about maybe how the business should be taken forward.
Saddles, that's very niche, I have to say. That is, I mean, there'll be very few of our students that will have a lot of expertise in the saddle market.
Well, totally. I mean, what I didn't know about saddles. There's quite a lot of pictures of saddles and pictures of horses in it, and there's a bit about the saddle making process as well, which I think could be useful and certainly could be an area which is drawn on in one of the variants.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the themes you think that would be tested or the variants, from what you've described to me just in that couple of minutes, the automation clearly, processes and export markets clearly, buy or build or outsource, those types of things all come to my mind from my experience. Just, I mean, literally thinking for 1 minute here.
Yeah, I think one of the things which is quite clever about the pre-scene is it's almost like a blank slate. I think one of the things that students need to be really careful about when they're thinking about the case is to say, right, it's going to go in this direction. Because as you know, there are 6 different variants. And if you make it too specific, then you're almost sort of writing yourself down a cul-de-sac. So by leaving it as vague as possible, it means there will be different avenues in which you can go down. So I think looking at past case studies is quite useful, because you get a sense of these are the different themes that can pick up. And a lot of the themes can be kind of quite generic. So Automation, like you say, is clearly going to be one of the variants. We can start using more machinery in terms of the manufacturing process. And in fact, within the pre-scene, it does say that some saddle makers are actually going down that route. So if I was a betting man, which I am, I would have some chunky money on at least one of the variants, thinking about that. And you can then start thinking, well, how would that be tested? Would that have an impact in terms of things like variances? Well, we're going to have to spend money on property, plant and equipment, so we can start testing some of the accounting standards and IAS 16 there. The lack of accounting systems, the lack of information systems is another big red flag. So I'd expect to see something about improving the costing system. And given that there's very little there in the first place, there's nothing to stop the business going the full hog and thinking about stuff like digital costing and how they can use the Internet of Things and big data to gather information to cost the saddles out. The organisation, it only really sells to recreational riders at the moment. Well, some other saddle makers, who knew there were so many different types of saddles? You've got show jumping, you've got equestrian, you've got steeple chasing, you've got dressage, you've got flat racing. There's loads and loads of different types of saddles for each different type of horse riding. So new products is probably going to be a new one. And you can start thinking about how we're going to forecast sales for that. Export, that's your new markets. And again, we've seen a couple of case studies go down that route in the past. So it really is quite open-ended, but I'd certainly expect to see one or two of those themes explored in the different variants.
One area, obviously, it's the OCS we're talking about. So technical testing in the exam is very, very important. And you've mentioned IFRS 16. Is there a couple, John, that you would say, well, need to really sharpen this up?
Well, the nature of the OCS exam is that it is technical. The irony is that the further up the levels you move, the more kind of common commercial business sense it is. But the lower level, you need that kind of technical backup. And in my experience, one of the areas that candidates particularly struggle with is the core area D, which is the financial reporting stuff. And I think the reason for that is if you're looking at stuff like activity-based costing, most people can kind of remember the basics and you think, well, if it's just right enough, I can kind of blag it and you'll pick up some marks. But if you're talking financial reporting, you can't just say, well, I reckon the best way to account for is going to be, because there's a set of rules. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at what you've got kicking around in the accounts, fair enough, it's a labour-intensive business, but the property, plant and equipment standards, so IAS 16, the capitalisation. You've got maybe revaluations to consider, but I'd say that's probably an outside impairment. If they start making different kinds of products, it might mean some of their own production tools aren't worth what they originally thought. They might be planning to sell some of those on. So you can look at IFRS 5, assets held for sale. You might even have issues in terms of inventory. So IAS 2, and then you've got your favourite and mine, which is things like events after the balance sheet. They tend to be the technical financial reporting standards, which the examining team seem to keep kind of coming back to time after time. So when you look into the technical, what would be the F1 syllabus, there's a lot in there, but the areas I talked about, they tend to be the areas which the case study dwells on. You need to know the rules, but you're always going to find within the exam that there'll be some limited numbers, there'll be a limited scenario to work with. So don't just parrot and regurgitate the standards. Make sure you can apply it to the scenario in front of you.
Yeah, make it relevant to the products, to the business lines, to the people, to the markets, etc. Yeah, that's one thing that's, again, in the reviews of each exam window is students to not make it relevant.
And you know yourself that the marking scheme is all about relevance.
Yeah, so if you remember one thing from this podcast is make it relevant. Just to use a 3-name buzzwords for this podcast, but that's really the most important thing. So in your experience, John, the types of mistakes that you see?
Number one is that some candidates go in just not knowing the technical stuff. And where you might be able to get away with that at some of the later levels and operational, it is still a very, very technical syllabus. You do need to know the stuff. So you need to be able to take a particular topic from the management accounting syllabuses and understand when it works, what are the pros and cons. In some ways, it's kind of quite tricky because you'll have been through the calculations. If someone gives you a problem, and throws you some numbers, you'll be able to get your calculator out and work out the solution. But if someone says, look, I've done the solution for you, be prepared to talk about how the process works, be able to talk about why you're actually doing it in the first place. But in terms of mistakes, yeah, you need to know the technical syllabus. But like I was just saying, it's not just about regurgitation. I always think that within every case, there's three things you've got to get your head around. You need to know, number one, the technical knowledge. You need to know, number two, what's going on in the pre-scene. Probably in some ways the most important, you need to have a look at what's going on with the scenario. So you've got a kind of tripod of the technical knowledge, the pre-scene, and the actual scenario. And most of the relevance is going to come from the scenario. Mm-hmm. So yes, you've got a saddle maker there, and you can hark back to some of the problems that the saddle maker is actually facing, but most of the relevance of your answer has to be tied into the particular problem which is thrown at you on the day of the exam. And looking at people's mock scripts, they will know some of the technical knowledge. They'll write something like saddles, 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 saddles to kind of kid the marking team that they know it's a saddle maker, but they don't really refer to the new information which is presented on the day.
So the unseen material, or the curveball that's thrown at you on the day, is how you refer back your decisions or your...
The point of the case study was to simulate the work environments. I've heard some of your colleagues talking about the case study as being like a job interview. Someone is going to hit you in a job interview and say, what do you think about this for our organisation? And that's the kind of question, that's the kind of skills that a senior accountant needs to have.
Just be frank about it, they are the most important skills for your working life. It's remembering really detailed technical details is not justifiable long term as a focus. That's what artificial intelligence and automation does. Okay, well, I think that's very useful. John, the next few questions are they're interlinked, but I guess we've talked a lot about technical aspects and what you know and how you can apply in the case study. But one thing I always think students are totally unprepared for quite often, because it's the first case study they may sit in this type of exam, is critical success factors and time management. I mean, it's the first time you'll have sat an exam that is time boxed, 3 or 4 questions, all of equal time or varied time. And the realization that they can't go back and fix a question, I use that phrase in inverted commas, after they complete the question, as the system moves on to the next one. What have you seen, and what's your experience with how people manage time and approaching the exams in general?
Well, I am always constantly amazed by the amount of candidates who've not really looked at past exam questions before they do an exam. I was teaching one group a couple of weeks ago, and almost kind of apropos of nothing, Kevin, one of them said, so the exam's on a computer, is it?
Wow.
Yeah. And this candidate genuinely thought that it was still kind of pencil and paper. You're like that? No, there's a kind of computer involved. You're going to type on the screen. Oh, really? And it was almost like, oh gosh, I didn't know that. So it is apparent that, there are some candidates who obviously don't know the way the exam works. And one of the things I kind of recommend, and you'd hope that most people are doing this already, but what CIMA produce on your website is fantastic. All of these past exam packs. And for me, that's what you need to be focusing on, because yes, you need the technical knowledge, but you need to almost understand the style of questions. If you look at what you've actually got on there was a case which was a couple of sittings back. It was a company that made tractors, and I think it was in the May-August 23 sittings. And there are so many parallels with what that company does and with what Kanann does. Maybe they've got a bit more automation kicking about. But if you look at the kind of scenarios and the kind of variants they're exploring, you can almost substitute the word tractors for saddles in a lot of the questions, and you'd end up with a very, very similar set of answers. So you need to understand not just what this topic is, but how this topic might be tested. What we're looking for is level 3 answers. I think a lot of candidates probably aren't aware of how the marks are actually awarded, that some of them will seem to think that you need to write this, this, and this, and by doing that you get 1, 2, 3 marks, whereas, and again, these past exam packs are great at explaining the marking schemes. You need to, if you want to get the level 3, which is the top level, you need to know your technical stuff. And also, you need to be able to answer each part of each question. So, right, yeah, well, you've got 4 tasks, great. And then each task will be broken down into 2 or 3 sub-questions. But then each of the sub-questions will be asking 2 or 3 different things. And sometimes I think this might seem like really a facile thing to say, but if you're looking at a requirement and it's got a comma in there, or it's got the word and in there, it's actually asking you to do more than one thing. When you look at the marking scheme to get level 3, you need to make sure you've written a little bit about each of those different things. And so one of the things the marking schemes really, really, really rewards is writing a little bit about a lot rather than a lot about a little.
That's really important. John, we hear this all the time, where 4 questions, I answered the 4 questions. Did you answer the 3 parts of question 1? No, I answered 1 part of question 1. I've literally had these conversations with students and are using our agricultural phrase here. The blinkers are on. All they see is the first part of the sentence. And the rest seems to disappear from the screen.
Yeah. Oh, you see the phrase activity-based costing, think, you know what? I'm going to write everything I know about activity-based costing.
Yeah. It's an interesting point I think you make about the tractor case study in the past. I mean, we obviously have some agricultural focused examiners within our organisation.
Hunting and shooting and fishing.
Some of the from the home counties might be writing our exams. But there would be some other issues, concerns and things there that are bound to, at least in some way, appear within this, you'd think. So advice to students would be to obviously look at the CIMA study hub, which John referred to earlier in the podcast as an area where you can get past papers, look at the marking schemes, look at the feedback, look at model answers. So if you haven't done that and not aware of the CIMA Study Hub, where have you been? To be quite frank, it's a valuable resource, but there's also a bunch of other resources that we have within the platform itself, within the FLP platform, which you should have a look at. Definitely. Look at the historical papers, as John has intimated. It's ultra important. Finally, John, we sort of have touched on this about immersing yourself in the scenario, but we'll just refer back to this very, very briefly. We know it's really important and applying what you know to the situation at hand, but you're trying to create a working day in an organisation, clearly, by taking the case study. So the type of things a student should be doing is referring to the people, referring to the processes, the products, the places. Is that what an examiner expects?
To be honest, it's almost like a hygiene factor. It's a given. You are given the pre-scene and there's a cast list in there, there's a product list in there. You know, you can answer without it, but it just makes it, I think the word I like to think of is authentic. It's authentic if you talk about your line manager, if you talk about John who runs the organisation, if you talk about the Comet saddle and the Meteor saddle and stuff like that, it just makes it more real. The pre-scene is not there just to waste 20 pages worth of material. There's a lot of useful stuff you can use just to add colour to your answer.
Immerse yourself in the situation. It's really important.
Yeah.
Pretend you're actually working for this organisation.
Exactly. You know, you are an actor and today you will play the role of.
And obviously don't fluff your lines.
Maybe one thing to just sort of touch on briefly is sort of time management. I know you alluded to the fact that you are living your life in 45-minute chunks. I think another area that we sort of see in scripts sometimes is I think you can sometimes tell when a candidate hasn't planned and they just write for 45 minutes. So to my mind, once you've clicked, the start section, it's well worth spending a good 10 minutes reading and planning your answer. And what I mean by that is making sure you're happy with the requirement and breaking it down. But for me, I would suggest planning your answer directly into the software itself. So get your headings down, get the points you've got down. That'll take you 10 minutes or so. And then you're going to spend the next 35 minutes turning each of those points into a grammatical sentence.
The funny thing about this, we were taught this when we did our A-levels. That's how you answer these questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how many people don't employ that technique.
And to be fair, for a lot of people, it's been such a long time since they've done this nature of exam. Yeah, it might be for some people a good sort of 10, 15 years since they've actually had to sit down and write.
If nothing else, what you do is you get down the points very quickly so you don't forget them, and then you can expand upon them.
Yeah, I mean, also use the marking scheme as well. Use the weightings. People sometimes overlook that. Okay, it's not about marks per se. It's more of a holistic approach, but each section has 25 raw marks. So if you can see that, this part of the question is allocated 20%, that means there are 5 raw marks available. And that gives you a rough idea about how much content you need to write. So you don't want to be writing 2 or 3 pages for something which is just 20%.
Yeah, that's a good point. People in their minds will extrapolate 5 marks to maybe 3 or 4 points. And
Exactly.
6 or 7 points or whatever it may be.
Yeah, because you don't need to get 100% to pass.
No, you can be a hero and try and get 135, but 80 is the target here.
Exactly.
Again, it sounds a bit facetious, but perfection is the enemy of good enough.
Exactly. Okay, John, thank you very much for your insight. It's been most valuable. I'm sure anyone who listens to this will find it the same, so close to the exam. And also our points around planning your answer, time management are very, very important, and the past papers. That's a really good between now and the exam to spend the time you have remaining. Okay, John, thank you for your time and your input today.
Good luck.
It's a good place to end our conversation, clearly. So there's plenty more to explore about this topic. As I say, one of the key things to look at is the study hub, and obviously use the case study review courses in the FLP platform. There's lots of fantastic resources, including the core activities. You've got your mock exams, you've got the webinar recordings at this stage. So use your time very, very wisely, but completion of the full case study review course won't guarantee a pass, but it will go a long way to getting you over the line if you put the time in. We do have some links in the show notes, so click on them if you want further information and links. Also, we'll have some more information on enroll.cgma.org. If you know a friend or colleague who could use this information, feel free to share it with your networks. You'll see the sharing buttons on the podcast app. That's it for now. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Wish you a good day.
This content is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA, the Association, or CIMA. It is provided with the understanding that they are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA, the Association, and CIMA make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.